Okay, as this continues to load, I just want to again thank everyone for joining us this morning. This morning's coffee chat is to update the community on the recent guidance from the state, and we are going to share out what we believe needs to happen based on this guidance. So again, I have a few more. It looks like now I'm just not really getting more people in. So I'm going to go ahead and start the presentation. So again, I'd like to welcome our panelists, and my system is, there we go. And also too, I'd like to share out that several of our board members are actually on the coffee chat today. They're listening in. So they do this a lot. I believe right now, Mr. Alexander and Mr. Russell are on. So they're listening in today. And there's probably a few others. I just haven't trying to go through the list here, but I'd like to thank them for being here this morning and just listening in to the coffee chat. And while they listen in, they also review the questions that come across. So please make sure you put your questions in the Q&A box there. So it looks like we've got a few more folks coming in. And so, as I said, today's coffee chat is to discuss basically the guidance and the new executive order from the governor this week. So, or I should say last week. As we've shared before, our number one goal in all this whole process is to keep students in schools. We want to keep them in our schools. We want the in-person education. We are working very hard to work through all of the processes and the systems that are laid out in front of us to make sure that we can keep students in school. Unfortunately, we have close to 600 students out, or over 600 students out, whether it's through being directly impacted by COVID, by having COVID, or by being contact traced and quarantined. So we're hoping that we'll be able to have a better solution for this, because that is our number one concern, is how many students are out and impacted by the contact tracing and quarantining process. So just as a reminder, the school board back in July, when we initially approved this plan, they did put in place that future changes to the plan. They gave us the authority to make changes, knowing that we couldn't always wait for a school board vote on changes. So the biggest part of this is that we consulted with the board, and we did that. We shared out with the board the information, and we've gotten feedback and input from the board. And so based on that, we're going to move forward with some changes to the plan so that we can get more kids back in school sooner. And so again, I've provided some information to the board, informed them, so they've all been consulted in what we're looking at doing moving forward. And for those of you just joining me, I see that we jumped up quite a few numbers. Again, thank you for coming in. We have with us our usual panelists and several school board members who are in there. There are several school board members joining us as well today. They are on the coffee chat and listening in and seeing your questions. And so the biggest thing that's come up here is the recent health department changes. Later last week, I guess, last week, the Johnson County Health Department removed all local recommendations. They removed all guidance, and they fell back to the state and the state guidance. Anything from the governor, the CDC, and the Indiana Department of Health is the guidance that the county has told us that we needed to follow. Shortly after that, Governor Holcomb updated control measures for schools and gave us basically two options. The executive order that came out basically said that option one would be do not require masks, but you'll need to contact trace and we'll have to go back to 6 feet and quarantine close contacts. And so that was option one. And then option two was to require, the option two was to require universal masking and then contact trace at 3 feet and then only notify contacts to whether or not that they've been exposed, and that we wouldn't quarantine. Those quarantines would be more based on your choice, or if you actually were an active case. So option two was the, I'm sorry, is everybody, I just got a text. Is everybody hearing me okay? Okay, all right, thank you. But maybe I couldn't, but maybe I didn't you couldn't hear me. So option two was to require universal masking in schools, contact trace 3 feet, and only notify close contacts. So I know a lot of you have seen this. We've seen this guidance from the state, and basically they call it guidance in the sense that we're guiding you. You've got two choices, you know, a lot of folks say so. So a lot of folks say, what is that? You know, what are these two choices? Well, this is kind of this slide represents the options that we have. You know, the mask requirement, and you can see that if someone is COVID positive, they isolate. If they are a close contact, they don't quarantine, but they self-monitor. They continue to wear a mask. With this option, we can bring back over 500 plus students into school immediately and get things going for those kids. With option number two, which is no mask required, again, close contacts or COVID positives would isolate, close contacts would quarantine. And this then drops the 3 foot rule and goes back to the 6 foot rule. So unfortunately, that would take in more individuals in the contact tracing process. And so as you can tell, we're leaning towards the mask requirement so that we can get students back into school quickly. So what happens if we don't do this? People are always like, well, this is just a recommendation. This is, you know, where's the law behind this? And you can see, here's the legal authority of the Indiana Department of Health. And the fact that we are a governmental agency, we are a school corporation, we are a government, you know, a governmental entity, we have to comply, and we must not, you know, willingly break laws. And so here are the codes, if you will, that would require us to follow these things outlined by the executive order. And so as you can see, the authority is given to the Indiana Health Department under the IC code. So that's why we are following those what we believe to be more of a directives in complying with the law. We're not in the business of you know, taking and challenging law legally. That would be more for attorneys to do. So with that, we have, you know, this is why we would do that. So I think at this point, Jason, you were going to talk a little bit more, maybe say a lot of what I already said.
Kind of more in the details of kind of what it looks like starting Monday. That's when our change would take effect, would be Monday, the 13th. At that point, based off these two choices, we would take the choice of keeping kids in school. And we believe to do that we need face coverings to be required for all individuals while they're indoors and on the bus. And kind of detailing out those two choices so that when everyone is masked in the classroom, we can reduce that contact tracing down to 3 feet. And again, we'd only notify parents. It'd be a parental choice if they quarantine or not. However, if either the positive case or the close contact is not masked, in the classroom, we'd use a 6-foot radius to contact trace. And we know what that looks like last year. That led us to about 9 or 10 times the amount of quarantines. And we don't want to go back to that. We don't want that many kids missing school. It is important to note there that the state's very clear, and they use the term mask. It's something that's a cloth form-fitting material. A face shield does not constitute a mask for this option from the state. It will have to be a face mask and not a face shield. There are still 2 options to avoid quarantine. If someone does end up being quarantined, they can be fully vaccinated. And we also still would look at a past COVID infection. It's important to note that's changed. It used to be 6 months when we had that recommendation from the county Department of Health, but now we have to fall back on the state guidance, and their guidance is 3 months on a past positive. And so that's something we'll be looking at. We don't expect a lot of quarantines. Most of those will come from activities connected to school. We could have a few in the lunchroom still where kids aren't masked, but we don't anticipate nearly the number we have today. We anticipate little to no quarantines as we move forward with this plan. And then finally, students involved with indoor extracurricular activities will also need to mask when they're not actively participating or performing. So in choir, this would be while they're on stage, they would not need a mask, but if they're behind the scenes and can wear a mask and not impede with their performance, then they would do that. Same for the volleyball or basketball court. If they're indoors while they're on the court of play, they could be unmasked, but as they're on the bench or the sidelines or in between halves or sets, they would need to wear their mask. Contact tracing for ECAs remain the same. This flexibility from the governor's executive order really just applies to the classroom. And so we will continue to contact trace our ECAs like we have. And that's one of those areas I said we could end up in a few quarantines there. Ms. Norman, anything I missed on that slide?
No, I don't think so. I think that the biggest thing is currently at 3 feet, we are able to kind of keep quarantine to about 2 to 3 students on average. When we expand out to 6, we're looking at expanding that at least double, I think, at the elementary level. And then when we look at like the secondary level in particular over 2 days, that's probably 3 to 4 per class period. And so I know just last year when we were doing that, we had some situations at that point, we were looking at 20 to 25 kids who would be quarantined versus I think the most we've had in a quarantine this year is 7.
Really appreciate your work on that. The next slide, Dr. Arkanoff just kind of summarizes the decision tree on this. So again, this is a lot like the slide we shared earlier, that when everyone's masked, you follow down the left side. We just monitor for symptoms. If symptoms develop, then we would quarantine and get tested. And then again, on the right side, if anyone's unmasked, again, wearing a face shield or something, or not wearing anything at all, that's where we would immediately contact trace and quarantine, and we would go back to those enhanced precautions for return. We hope we don't have to go down the right side of this decision chart very often. We hope we can stay on the green side and keep kids in school. So we'll go to the next slide. We've had this question. So how long will students be in mask? And this is a difficult question to answer. What we've tried to do is provide you what we believe is our best situation and our best answers to this question. The governor's current executive order expires on September 30th. He may or may not change that. He may or may not extend it. That's the date that we know that this guidance is good for. In the past, he's typically extended, or like he just did at the end of August, he tweaked it and added this new option. And we would continue to look at it every time there are changes or additions made to that order. Under the current control measures, we don't really have an option to remove masks that would not significantly increase our quarantines. That's what Ms. Norman was just speaking to. If we were to take the option of no masking, we would have to use the 6-foot rule, and that would greatly increase our number of quarantines. So we really need to see some additional flexibility or options from the state or local level before we could remove the mask. Our school board really believes that they want to answer this question. They want to have something good to go back to. And so they're going to meet as frequently as needed. We're going to continue to work with the Johnson County Health Department and the state to come up with an option that would be a better option for our students, that once we see our cases return back to a normal level, that we could actually remove the mask requirement, go back to a mask optional or recommended status, and not have to quarantine as many students. We just really feel like we've been given these two choices, and we have to err on, or we have to make the choice on the side of keeping kids in school. We do want to say that we believe that once the county returns to blue advisory level, our cases would also drop back down, much like they were before school started this year. And we anticipate that would be a time where, if no other guidance is available, we could go back to a mask optional status, and our quarantines would be within control, because we wouldn't have very many cases. Remember, we don't have a quarantine issue this year as much as we have a number of positive cases leading to quarantine issue. And that's why we made the changes prior to the plan. That's why we continue to make the changes today. So let's talk a little bit about face covering exemptions. This has come up. Want to just remind you of what's in the handbook language. And this is if a student's unable to wear a face covering due to a medical condition, a physician's note must be supplied. We do have some options for students that would be exempt through their IEP or through a Section 504 plan. We would also, any new notes that come in, we would run them through one of those plans or an individualized health plan. We would come up with or we would have a method in place that the parents would understand what accommodations we'd be making for students. But we need to make sure it's a verified medical reason for the mask exemption. And really the reason for that is that this is kind of a two-sided issue on the quarantining. If either the positive case or the close contact is not wearing a mask, we have to use that 6-foot rule. And so an unmasked student might impact a masked student and vice versa. And so we want to make sure that the face covering exemptions we have in place are truly the ones that are medically necessary and needed, so we can keep our kids in school. And then just to recap a little bit, and some other bullet points we didn't cover in the first few slides. Again, masks would be required inside schools and on school buses. Close contacts would only be notified. As Dr. Arkanoff mentioned earlier, we would return all current quarantine asymptomatic students on Monday. And anyone who's currently back in our buildings on enhanced precautions would just need to monitor for symptoms. They wouldn't need to do the other precautions at this time, because really everybody's going to kind of be on those precautions as we're all wearing face masks. Students involved with the extracurricular activities, we talked a little bit about that. They would wear a mask when they're not performing or participating. And we expect little to no quarantines. That's really what we expect to see on Monday. The next few slides talk about data, but is there anything there to add, Dr. Arkanoff, Ms. Norman, anything to add in there?
I think from my perspective, I guess I'd just like to add, the one thing that I know that there is, kind of a divide between masks and no masks. I think the one thing that has been a unified issue, at least that I have been offered, or it has been explained to me multiple times, and questioned multiple times, is this issue of quarantine. There's always been the fact that we are quarantining a lot of kids who are healthy. They don't ever exhibit symptoms. They don't test positive. They actually, with the day 8 returns, they test negative. Now, mind you, this year we have had more close contacts who have tested positive than we did last year, all of last year. However, still, the majority are still testing negative. And so this allows us to continue to keep the kids in school, which, by all accounts is the best place for them to be. It's something that, we have been trying to find this answer for over a year. And so I know it's not perfect, and there's still the mask involvement, but the fact that we can keep the kids in school and we can kind of keep our focus there, I think is huge. So I hope people can recognize that, and hopefully we can kind of move forward and just continue to watch for the symptoms and things like that. The parents I know have been doing a great job with at home. So, you will still receive a notification through Parent Square if your student is a close contact, just so that you can then decide for yourselves, if at that point you are more comfortable keeping them at home to quarantine, that will be fine. You'll just need to kind of let us know that you're doing that so that we don't we won't be making adjustments to attendance like we were previously unless we know from you that that's what you're planning to do. And if your student remains asymptomatic, please send them to school. I think the other part with this is like with the at the high school level and middle school level with the student athletes and things, if they're identified as a close contact, currently we have enhanced precautions in place, which allows the students, we've been able to get it so that the students can practice because we still had to have the enhanced precautions. This, we won't have that component to this. So even if they're identified as a close contact, but they're asymptomatic, they're not quarantined, so they'll be able to still participate.
Yes, and so just a couple of really quick, thank you, Amy, a couple of quick things on some of the slides that Jason, you just went through. In regards to the mask exemptions, like I said, we have the two options, the IEP and the 504, all of those are based on medical exemptions. One thing important piece in all of this is, so why masks? The purpose of the mask is that I wear a mask to protect you. So for every exemption we make, for every folks that we bring in that does not wear a mask, then that 6-foot rule applies all around them. And that does impact the quarantining piece. So that's why we have to be tight on that. The law does not require us to offer religious exemptions, so therefore we don't, because that helps us reduce down that impact of the 6-foot piece. Other districts have done that, and we know that, and they are also dealing with those issues that are impacting them with the 6-foot radius. So for us, we wanted to make sure that we could limit that impact of if someone is not wearing a mask. So that is why we went with not offering any religious exemptions. Now, the other question that I know is out there is the ESSA dollars, and they are not tied to masks in any way, shape, or form. There's nothing in the grant that says anything about masks. There's no money because of it. There's no, that's just honestly just rumors floating out there on the internet. There is no connection at all. The ESSER grant is about learning loss, and we used it for putting filtration systems in our air systems for the school district and so on. So, and the majority of the money at this point is mostly in regards to learning loss. And I don't know, Nora, do you want to add anything to the ESSA conversation there?
No, Dr. Arkanoff, you explained that. Well, we don't have to report that, and that hasn't been a part of qualifying for those grants.
Great. Jason, do I turn that back to you? Do you have more slides?
We've just got some data to share, just to kind of update folks on where we're at. And Ms. Norman, do you want to run through a couple of these?
Sure, I can do that. As you can see, looking at our total cases as we are, cruising through the weeks of school, we've more than doubled each week. Our top week was week of August 23rd, where we were at 134, but really for 3 weeks straight, we've been around that, just a little over, averaging over 100 cases. This week, my hope is that we're not going to hit it because it was a 4-day week, but looking at today's data from the Johnson County Health Department, I'm not so sure. I think we may see a bump in cases next week related to the Labor Day holiday. So we'll kind of see. But currently we're still trending in high numbers for where we were last year. I think our total is around 403 total cases since we started school on August 6th. August 5th, we didn't have cases reported. So our first day of reported cases was August 6th. So from August 6th to September this week, we were at over 400 cases. So.
And Amy, just to clarify, that 667 is the number of students out today. Is that correct?
That was the number of students out at the conclusion of last week. There have been, yeah. So there's,
okay.
It's kind of it's a rotating target. So as we have students roll back in, depending on their dates of return, that date fluctuates or that number fluctuates daily.
Gotcha.
You know, sometimes we end up with a net because we get so many, you know, we'll have like a whole group come back. But unfortunately we'll have, you know, two or three more positive cases that kind of bump us back up over those numbers again. I think it's important also to realize that when we talk about quarantines, you know, what we're discussing with the close contacts, that's for school purposes only. If you have a positive case in your home, the siblings will still need to quarantine and stay home. The likelihood that they will test positive because it's somebody in their house is much, much greater. And so those like that, the day 8, day 11, and day 15 options for return would be utilized for siblings. You know, if you have somebody, you know, for example, at my house, if one of my kids tested positive, that impacts 3 other siblings potentially. They would still need to quarantine because it's in the house. So the close contact at school is just a kind of a different thing because it's a much more controlled environment.
Go to the next slide.
Yeah, on the next slide. Yep, keep going, Amy.
Did I
Oh,
skip?
okay.
Okay, there.
Yeah, no. So this one, again, this looks at like where we were at in, as far as positive cases a year ago to positive cases now. Last week, you know, if you look at week 5, we had 107 cases. A year ago on week 5, we had 3. You know, by week 5 last year, we had, let's see, about 13 cases. You know, week 5 this year, we're at, you know, just over 400. So there's a lot of, you know, the Delta variant, you know, you hear a lot about that in the news. It is a highly transmissible component of COVID. The latest information from the epidemiologists at the state health department was that that's accounting for about 99% of cases in the state of Indiana right now. And so that is kind of why we're seeing the numbers that we are seeing. So.
These are the related absences.
Yeah, these are the related absences. So as you can see, like week 3 last year, those are the blue lines. We had 418 kids out. I think it's important to note that was on 3 cases. And that was with the 6-foot radius. Like I said, we had situations last year where we would have 25 kids out because of 1 positive person. This year, the quarantine numbers, we've been able to keep those tighter because previously without masks, you know, we were following 3 feet with without masks. And so it's still obviously impacted a lot. We still have 667 kids who are out for COVID related absences, but that also includes our positive kids in that amount. You know, if we go to 6 feet with the number of positive cases that we have, when you consider that we had 3 cases last year and had 418 kids out, you know, if we have, you know, 100 cases in a week, that's a lot of kids out of school. And that would be very disruptive to the educational process.
And that's 667, that's just counting them once, right? I mean, we're just saying.
Correct. That's
that,
just, we're just counting it. And you know, that is the positive case. That is the quarantines associated at school. That's also families contacting us who they say, you know, we're awaiting COVID testing. That's families who have other siblings in the home that are being quarantined because maybe mom or dad tested positive. Those are all kind of COVID related numbers.
Okay, our next slide is daily absences.
Yeah, this is just a look at kind of where we're standing when we take into account not just COVID related absences, but just daily absences in general. This would account for, you know, there's families who do not want to test their children, but they will keep their children home if they are sick. and I appreciate that immensely. There are families who they have, tested their children are negative, but they maybe are positive for strep. This accounts for all of the absences that we have.
Okay. Then it looks like our vaccination rates are continuing to increase in the county, as you can see in our zip codes. So these are the 3 zip codes that attend Center Grove schools, and Bargersville still leading the pack at almost 80%. So, okay.
Still encourage vaccinations whenever possible.
And then next is our dashboard. Stacy, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, it is. You can see on that right side, accessing the dashboard, you can get to it through the district homepage. All of our websites also have those rotators that says COVID-19 protocols on it, on the right there on the homepage, and then the site shortcuts, which is down a little farther in the middle of the page, also includes it. So you can get there several different ways.
Great. Okay, and so that's it for the presentation piece. I know we addressed several questions during the process. Stacy, are there some clarifying questions or some other questions you'd like us to address?
Yeah, one for Amy. Can you clarify about if a student or a staff member is vaccinated but tests positive, do they still have to quarantine?
Yeah, I mean, yes, we call it isolation. If you test positive, you need to isolate for 10 days. If you are asymptomatic, it would be from the date of your test. And if you are symptomatic, it's from kind of the date of your symptoms. I know there have been situations where people have maybe had symptoms for 2 weeks. They went and got tested and were negative, and then go, maybe a week later and test positive. We would go from that date of that second positive, or, when they tested positive, because it's difficult. We can't discern, especially if they were negative prior. There's no way to know kind of when the COVID developed. So we err on that side of caution that we would use the testing date in that situation. But yes, even if you're vaccinated, you still need to isolate if you test positive, just to make sure that you're not transmitting that to other people.
And another clarification related to masks inside versus outside. And then also if there'll be any reduction in attendance numbers for events.
I don't know about the events one. I've not heard of that. So, but I'll let others kind of address that.
No.
As far as masks, masks indoors versus outdoors. So the recent state guidance that came out was that if students are outside, they can be without masks. There's not really a contact tracing component to that. And so that's the guidance that we're going to follow in regards to it. If they're indoors, that's where the guidance addresses kind of that close contact. And again, that's within that 3 feet. However, they did remove that requirement to quarantine if everybody's masked. So, but outdoors, if kids go out to recess and they're playing outside, then they just go outside and play. If they take their masks off, that's perfectly fine to play outside. And to be honest, we have not, our quarantines when we've done them, have not looked outdoors. And we've tried even all of last year to just allow the kids to get outside and play, and to kind of do that as they can. We did do some potting so that they were, in their specific groups, especially at the elementary level in some circumstances. However, when we have done when we have been looking at close contacts and quarantines, the focus has been on the indoor setting and in the classrooms.
And last year's guidance from the state and the rules that the county then applied as well were tied to county level advisory color codes. And so we did reduce capacity in extracurricular events. That's not the recommendation or the requirements coming down at this time. So we've not put any additional reduction on capacity for our events. When we have evening activities, such as parent-teacher conferences, where we would require our teachers to be present at that time. That's something that we would require our outside guests to wear a mask to, and we would take some precautions to keep everyone spaced out as well as possible. But as far as voluntary attendance at activities, there's no change.
All right, what about hallways? Amy, do you want to talk about that?
Hallways, as far as contact tracing a hallway, or?
Right, is that a concern?
No, I mean, with everyone masked, no. I know at the high school, when you base it on the time frame that people spend with one another and, walking by one another in a hallway, it would not fit the definition for close contact. My hope is that when kids test positive, that they're comfortable enough with their friends that if they know that they've been hanging out with them probably more than that they would be reaching out to their friends to let them know that they tested positive. We're not able to follow every student on video to see how much time they're spending with people. It's just impossible. So there is some element of if kids feel that they've spent too much, and we have had that. We have had situations where kids have come to us and said that they felt they probably spent too much time with someone else and they should be quarantined. And so in that situation, we discuss that with them. And then, if in talking to them, if that still meets the definition of what would be considered close contact, then we would go forth with that quarantine situation. In this situation with everybody in a mask situation, if everybody's wearing masks, that definitely is not a concern. So.
Okay, Jason, do you want to talk about masks for things like field trips and then also how volunteers would be impacted?
Yeah, definitely. So for a field trip, we would definitely look at the destinations requirements, and depending on the county, that could be different than what we currently require. Our current requirement is while they're in our schools and on our school buses. And so that's when we would require the masking per what we've been instructed from the state. But as we attend other areas, it may be required, it may not be, depending on the destination. But while they're on the bus to the destination, they would definitely wear their mask. For volunteers, we did make a change to that last time we updated the plan. We're going to continue with that our volunteers and our visitors would be required to wear a mask as well while they're in our buildings. The only time that really is a little different is when they're doing an outdoor activity, or if they are renting our buildings and our facilities. These restrictions don't necessarily apply to all of those rentals.
And to clarify, if a parent chooses to quarantine because their student was a close contact, is that an excused absence?
It counts as a Q. So from the state's perspective, if you're quarantined, you're not sick, so you would be considered present. It's not considered an absence because you should be participating in your classes and doing your schoolwork.
Yeah, the state translates that to virtual due to COVID is kind of the term they use. We just use the Q code in Skyward, and that's what you'd see with your student.
I know a lot of people are kind of frustrated because that 2% guidance just came out not too long ago, and that made sense to a lot of people. Can you talk about why that changed?
Yeah, so we basically went to that model based off the recommendation from Johnson County Health Department. That recommendation no longer exists from them. And so we have to kind of fall back to the next level up, which is the state. And in the executive order, it's very clear that we can only do things that are more restrictive, not less restrictive. And so that's not an option available. We will continue to track that. That is something we'd like to maybe be able to return to if given no other option. But at this time, to return to it, our county would have to step back and say, yes, you can return to this model. And so we'll continue to work with them. We do meet with Dr. Qualls in the health department regularly, and we continue to ask for additional options available at the county level.
And several parents have asked about what will happen if they don't send their kids to school because they don't want them to wear masks.
Yeah, so we would definitely work with those parents to find out if there's a verified medical exemption option that we can put in place for that student. After that, that would be a type of truancy from school, and we would have to follow the attendance process for that. And so when you hit a threshold of 10 days, there are some steps that start kicking in, and we would treat that that situation like that. Unfortunately, we hope that doesn't come to that. We know we have parents that have been understanding, and have we've tried to share the information of how we've ended up in this situation and why this has to take place. And we found that with many of our parents in our community that they've understood. They don't like it, but they understand the reality of it, and they've complied and send their students to school. And we hope that continues.
And just to kind of piggyback on that, it is very difficult on each building, the principals, the teachers, they're just trying to do their jobs. And so I understand the frustration. Believe me, I'm not a mask fan, absolutely not. But, we're doing this. We are trying to accommodate, the majority of our community's needs. We want to make sure folks are healthy, and if we can take measures to do something to protect others from, potentially us, that's why we're doing this. That's the whole idea behind why we wear a mask. So we just ask that you think about the individuals working in each building, and the work that they have to do, and if you would please just help us by helping follow the guidance from the state. We understand for some folks this is unacceptable. And we understand if it's unacceptable, honestly, the only real option then is not to come to school. And there are other alternatives out there that parents can seek if they would like to do that. And you can find that information out on the web. But as far as in person in school here, we will be requiring masks. And I should add that violation process of not wearing masks is covered under the handbook. It will be dealt with as a handbook violation, a dress code violation, and it could escalate into an insubordination, depending on how everyone reacts to the violation. And so the principals will deal with it accordingly. And so we just hope that folks can work with us on this and help us get through this and understand the position that we're in as a school district.
I think we may have had some that joined late, but can you explain the executive order and the choice that the school district has in front of them as far as the limits of that executive order?
Let's go back to that slide. Did I go too far?
One more.
Would it be? There we go.
Actually, go up a few more, Rich. Go.
Forward.
Yep, you're going the right way.
All right.
No, you're not. Sorry.
No, I wasn't. I think I know where we're at.
Should be the option 1, option 2.
There it is.
Slide.
There we go.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, I said this as earlier. Basically, the governor's issued this executive order as a governmental entity, which a school district is. We must comply with the guidance and/or directives, if you will, and the options we have before us. So Johnson County's removed all local guidance and has pushed it back to the state and CDC guidance. So we're to design a plan that follows that. The governor then, in turn, has given us 2 options. One is to not mask and contact trace 6 feet and quarantine. That is in the executive order. That is required under code for us to do. And option 2 is to universal mask, and we don't have to quarantine. And we contact trace at 3 feet, and we just notify. So we believe that option number 2 will keep the majority of our students in school. which has been our biggest concern. So that's why we're asking everyone if they would wear masks and help us keep more kids in school. So does that kind of clarify that or restate that, Stacy? Yeah, okay.
And then
And
do you want to talk about how long it's going to go? Again,
Yeah,
to reiterate.
yeah, so I believe that was right here. You know, right now, the executive order is through September 30th. We will anticipate some probably follow-up from the governor's executive order. We'll look at what our options are at that point. And then we're also continuing to watch local input, for example, the Johnson County numbers. So as you can see, that bottom bullet there is whether or not the county gets back to blue. We believe that might be an appropriate time for us to remove the mask requirements. The school board will, we intend to meet as frequently as needed to review the data and any new guidance available. And so that's where we are with how long it's, as Jason said earlier, this is a little frustrating for us because we really don't have a really good endpoint to provide folks. We would like to have that as well. But it's really hard for all of us when the executive order doesn't necessarily point back to any particular data itself to say this is when you'll come out of it. The only thing they gave us was an end date to the order, the expiration, and sometimes the executive order expires and we never hear anything else, and sometimes the governor issues a new executive order that obviously changes things. So.
Do you want to clarify related to the board and this decision process and how they were consulted? Sure.
So again, in the original plan, the board has provided authority for myself and the administration team to make changes as needed, particularly if the changes need to occur quickly for the benefit of kids. And so one of the processes that we use in updating the board is via email. We shared out via email information about the governor's update. We then had an executive session where we informed them with exactly the slides you're seeing today and explained to them where we believe we need to go. And then we gave that time for the board to kind of digest that so that they understood the direction we were going to go. In an executive session, no one votes. We don't vote in that. They can't take a vote in executive session. We just inform them. That's where they receive information. Why is it an executive session? It's under school safety and involving a safety plan. So again, the board didn't need to vote on it because they developed this particular piece in the original plan, which was to allow us, the administration, to work with the Indiana Department of Health and of course the Johnson County Health Department, and then move forward with any changes that might be what we believe to be more beneficial for the student body. I think we covered most questions. I know we're kind of wrapping up on time, but is there any other?
Yeah, do you want to clarify when it would start?
Yes, it'll start Monday. We wanted to give families time. If families are considering a 504, they'll need to reach out to their principals, and or an IEP update, they'll need to reach out to their principals. It does require considerable medical documentation, so they'll also need to work with their doctors. So that gives families time before we institute the change. Also too, we can't have the students who are on quarantine come back yet until we are fully masked up. Then they can come back. So that's why those students can't come back until Monday as well. And so that all will take place on Monday. And again, we will not be granting religious exemptions as it would impact the number of quarantines in the schools.
Can you clarify if individual schools will be allowed to tweak this guidance at all?
No, they will not in Center Grove schools, if that's what the question is. We as a school district will not allow each building. We really, I understand folks' frustration. We really enjoyed the 1% and 2% as well. And we saw some opportunity there. However, with that guidance being taken away, we don't have that ability.
And if you want to let people know, I know some people said they had to dip in and out. We will post this on our coffee chat website. So it's our website, then /coffee chat. And then this plan, this presentation will also be posted on the COVID-19 page. It's on that first protocols page at the bottom. We've posted the State Health Department guidance as we've received it and as it has changed, and then also these plans.
Of course, the COVID information is also at this website as well. I want to thank too the school board members for being there, being on today. Like I said, we had several. I know our school board president is on there. He's still on there today, Mr. Russell. And I'm trying to see, I can't really see who else is on there. And so with that, we'll go ahead and close today's coffee chat, and just thank you all again for attending, and we appreciate all those that understand where we're at in this situation. So thank you. Please help us work together and to get through this very difficult time. So thank you.